Just trying to see if it's, oh, here we go. Great. Okay, great. Welcome everybody to our webinar today on First Nations Forest Stewardship and Connections to FSC Principles, using the national standard as a tool for forest management. So I'm Tammy Tremblay. I'm the Environmental Initiatives Lead for Wahkohtowin Development, and I will be facilitating today's session. So we'll start by reviewing the agenda. And so we're going to start by a presentation from Wahkohtowin Development. We have a presentation by Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources and a presentation by Gwet'in First Nation. We're going to ask that you please keep your questions till the end of all the presentations. And we'll just note that the question period won't be recorded. So yes, welcome, and we'll get started with our first presentation by Elena McCullough, who works for, well, she's an intern with Wahkohtowin Development, but she's also back to school for her master's degree. So I will pass it over to Elena.
Thank you, Tammy. Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So yes, I also wanted to take the opportunity to say welcome everybody. I'm really happy that all of you are able to join us today. And we've got some really great presentations from Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources and on behalf of Gwet'in First Nation that we're going to get into shortly. But first, I'm just going to provide a little bit of background for those who may be unfamiliar with either Wahkohtowin Development or FSC or this project that's bringing you the session today. So first of all, what is Wahkohtowin? So Wahkohtowin Development is a 100% First Nation owned company based out of Chapleau, Ontario on Treaty 9 territory. Wahkohtowin was formed by 3 First Nations to advance strategic economic opportunities with a mandate to advance an inclusive regional collaborative approach to economic development through First Nation municipal collaboration. So Wahkohtowin also provides opportunities for local Indigenous youth through their Guardian program. And you can see pictured on the slide here some of our Guardians doing vegetation index surveys in the summer. Wahkohtowin also recently opened the Innovation Center in Chapleau in August 2021 to support readiness, regional partnerships, and collaboration discussions. Wahkohtowin is supporting their owner communities as they actively promote a stronger role in resource development and use to industry and the province. So the second organization that I'm introducing to you all today is the Forest Stewardship Council. And I know a lot of people on the call are probably already familiar with FSC, but I'll just quickly describe it for anybody who may not be. So FSC produces standards for responsible forestry that forestry companies may choose to follow in order to earn an FSC certificate and be able to market their product using the FSC logo, which you have probably all seen before. It's this little tree with the check mark. So it's a voluntary certification system that encourages companies to follow more sustainable and responsible practices in exchange for being able to use this widely recognized symbol that signals to customers that these products are from trustworthy sources. So I also have an image here on the slide of the FSC National Forest Stewardship Standard for Canada. So the standard is structured around 10 principles, which you can think of as the essential elements of forest stewardship. So some principles that are going to come up in the other presentations today are principle number 3, which covers Indigenous people's rights, including free, prior, and informed consent, and principle number 9, which covers high conservation values. Each principle has several criteria. And the principles and criteria are set at the international level, so they're the same everywhere in the world. But within each criteria, there are 1 or more indicators. And these are the specific directions an organization must follow and the level at which audits are done to verify that certificate holders are meeting the requirements of the standard. So now that we've introduced these 2 organizations, we can discuss how they are connected through this project that's bringing you today's webinar. So Wahkohtowin has experienced firsthand how FSC raises the bar for forestry and believes that FSC Canada's National Forest Stewardship Standard creates opportunities for greater participation of Indigenous peoples in forest management. Wahkohtowin also has a contract with Environment and Climate Change Canada to explore the landscape level solutions found in the new National Forest Stewardship Standard. And these are landscape level solutions related to free, prior, and informed consent, Indigenous cultural landscapes, species at risk, and ecosystem gap analysis. So Wahkohtowin has been working on this project for the last few years, and so far has produced several resources that are aimed specifically at Indigenous people and communities who may want to learn more about the opportunities that the National Forest Stewardship Standard offers. So quickly, I'll just go through some of the resources that we've produced. For instance, we have several webinar recordings that are available on our webpage, and I'll be putting the link to this in the chat in a couple moments. So we've produced a series of webinars that provide some more background information on FSC and the national standard and how the system works when it comes to, again, audits and certification bodies and how to file complaints. We've also produced an Indigenous cultural landscape case study that is available to view on our webpage as well, and we're currently producing a second one with UINR. We also have a template for a direct agreement between an FSC certified company and an Indigenous community or First Nation that is available to download, and I will specifically be sharing the link to that as well. And more recently, we've created a Facebook page to try and more broadly share these resources like webinar recordings and to promote events like the one today to try and get this project out there more and share these resources more broadly. And we're also maintaining 3 coordinators as part of this project. So Wahkohtowin Development is serving the role of the central coordinator. And in this session today, you're going to hear from members of our East and West coordinator teams. So the idea is to bring the 3 regional perspectives together on this project and increase the capacity to be able to answer questions or provide services to people who may have questions or an interest in learning more about FSC. So that was my quick rundown of this project and some of the actors behind this project. I hope that was helpful and will make the next presentations hopefully more clear for anybody who's new to this subject. So thank you again for joining us. Again, I'm going to put the link to this webpage in the chat so you have access to those resources that I was describing. And so we hope you take advantage of that and that you enjoy the rest of the presentations today. So I will pass it back over to Tammy to introduce our next presenter.
Great, thank you, Migma. That was a good presentation and a good little intro to FSC and who we are at Wahkohtowin. So next, we're going to hear from representatives from the Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources, Veronica and Elizabeth. So I'm going to share. There we go. Whenever you're ready, Veronica.
Okay, I just can't see the slides. I can see people, but maybe I'm not looking in the right place. Can everyone else see the presentation? No, eh? Okay. Can you hear me, Tammy?
You.
Okay. There we go. There we go.
Perfect.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Gwet'in, good afternoon, everyone. I'm virtually sending greetings from the unceded territory of the Migma people in Nova Scotia. I'm located myself in Shabuktuk, which is Halifax, and my colleague Elizabeth, who is the manager of the Migma Forest Initiative, is in Unama'ki, which is Cape Breton Island. So thank you very much for having us today. We really appreciate it. So next slide. Just to give a sense of the Mi'kma'ki traditional territory, here's an older map that shows that the Migma people since time immemorial, have been living in both areas of Quebec, northern New Brunswick, all through Nova Scotia, and into Newfoundland as well. There are communities all throughout this area, and in particular, in regards to FSC and the Migma Forest Initiative, we're going to be looking at Unama'ki, which I mentioned, which is the small little island just off Nova Scotia, not island, but there's a little causeway that you have to go over. And the 5 Migma communities there are surrounded in the Bredor Lakes, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place. So I hope you don't mind, Elizabeth, but I'm inviting everybody to come down to Unama'ki and see beautiful Cape Breton. So these are the communities on the side here. On the left, you see the names of the communities. And within Nova Scotia, I just want to point out that there's the Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources that is working on this project. And there's also the Confederacy of Mainland Migma that is from the central region. So we'll go to the next slide and get into it. Perfect. So this just gives an overview of the land. It's a very basic slide, but it shows you in orange or for red, depending on your screen, the lands that have been, the agreement with the federal provincial government. These are the lands that the Migma Forestry Initiative will be working on. So you can see the lands up towards Unama'ki, smaller parcels, and then in central mainland, interior of the mainland, is St. Croix area, and there's quite a bit of a piece in that area, which is closer to where I am. And then further down on the south shore is the Digby area, where the communities in that region, that is where the other of there's 38,000 hectares that was given over back to the Migma communities to manage through this 3-year pilot project. So that's visually another sort of representation. So we can take the next slide, Tammy. So just a history of the MFI. I've just given you some, but this is a province-wide initiative. It's a Migma-led forestry initiative where we're looking at the values of the forestry and how those values link to FSC. But the project itself, the Migma Forest Initiative, is steered by a Migma Forest Advisory Committee, which Elizabeth is very involved with, and it incorporates all of the communities in Nova Scotia, the 13 Nova Scotia Migma communities. And as I mentioned, the Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources is quite a large organization with, I think, about 40 staff at this point. In Unama'ki, working in various areas, whether it's marine, forestry, traditional knowledge, and that's one of the organizations and where I'm employed with right now. And the other organization, as I mentioned, is the Confederacy of Mainland Migma that does similar work in forestry, in other elements of environment and conservation on the mainland of the province. And then the Migma Rights Initiative, KMKNO, is basically the representative for the Assembly of the Nova Scotia First Nations or Migma Chiefs. And they've been instrumental in working through the agreement that is now with the province and the federal government, looking at this 3-year pilot project for UINR. So the long-term goal of the MFI is to develop an agreement at the end of this pilot project. And as part of that, that's the linkage with FSC, was that as this project goes forward over time, to continue to look at those linkages between FSC certification and the Migma values and ethics and how the Migma want to go forward with their forestry. Next slide, please. So guiding principles that sort of, and these are, I'm sure there's definitely some similarities. This might have a little bit of a maritime twist when it comes to the Migma, but just some overarching guiding principles that the Migma are considering throughout this whole process. Miskanogama, which is a respect for all living and non-living spirits and people, being all connected, whether that's the animals, the plants, the forest, people that have come before and will come after us. And Eduguma is the two-eyed seeing principle that you've probably heard about. Elder Albert Marshall and his wife Mardina Marshall had been talking for about two-eyed seeing for many, many, many years, and then through the University College of Cape Breton, it became more and more and more recognized, and now Albert is known. His wife sadly passed away, but now Albert is known as the person that brought two-eyed seeing to the people. So it's well respected and adopted as the language continues within that process too. Ndugalimp is the approach that the Migma people are taking, and a very wise way of living where you take only what you need. And you honor the creator and you honor the natural bounty of the earth in order that it can provide for not only an individual, but more importantly for the community. I'm just going to tilt that a little bit to get some of the sun out of my eyes. But okay, next slide. We are all treaty people, and I put this slide in because just to reference the fact that in Nova Scotia, actually in all of the maritime region, not in the Atlantic region up north, like in Labrador, but within the maritime region, we are still discussing and negotiating land claims, because in this part of the country, it is all under the peace and friendship treaties of the 1600s, 1700s. And that's a consideration in this concept. We are all treaty people. It just doesn't, so often it's viewed as just the Migma Treaty, when it's in fact the treaty of all the citizens that live in the land in the East Coast. So as I move from that to that context, we're going to talk about partners a little bit. And UINR feels very strongly about the partnership that they're fostering with FSC and the people within FSC, our partners here today, to ensure that ecological targets are met in a sustainable way, and immediately knowing that those ways of knowing and being for the Migma people are also respected. So that's a broader look at where we're going. So we'll get into those principles a little bit in a moment. Go ahead, Tammy. So there's a lovely mainland, not a mainland, that's a lovely moose from Unama'ki. I don't know his name, and he was probably delicious, but anyways. So the two-eyed seeing is critical to the Migma forestry values, and it comes from that. And some of those considerations, as I previously mentioned, is the fact that Ndugalimp meshes quite nicely with the FSC principles and approaches. And most importantly for Migma, it's the fact that the Western science and traditional science can be incorporated together to bring a good way of doing things and a sustainable way of doing things in regards to forest classification. And again, two-eyed seeing is a deep respect and wise use of natural resources offered by the Creator and the Earth Mother. And also MFI reflects the relationship, this ongoing relationship that I mentioned between the province of Nova Scotia and the federal government and the Migma people at large. Next slide, please. So some of the shared principles, and there's Elder Albert in the middle there with the white ribbon, the bluish ribbon shirt, and the folks from UINR. So the shared principles that, and this is a brief presentation, so it really doesn't get into the breadth and the depth of really how connected Migma values and principles are to FSC, but we just pulled out a few important ones. So in regards to Indigenous people's rights, and the respect for land management and traditional territories is very important to First Nations people here. And also community relationships, where we're looking at the importance, the ecological significance, and the importance of that in sustaining our lives. From a Migma perspective, there is great acknowledgement and support for FSC's global recognition of Indigenous, customary, and territorial rights that are recognized under UNDRIP, and a tool of free, prior, and informed consent. And that's an issue spoken quite a bit in Nova Scotia because, again, with the negotiations with the treaties, etc., these things are coming up a bit more. I'm going to try to move there. That's a little bit better. And lastly, in this slide, the Migma Forestry Initiative and the people that are working on that, because it's quite a number of people, very much honor the 7-generation forward stewardship approach. This is supported by the Migma people to work towards the regeneration of the forest to its natural state. So it's kind of going backward and then going forward. It's kind of reverse. So taking that 7-generation forestry, and prior to colonization, the forest was so rich and full in Mi'kma'ki, and due to a lot of clear cutting, we've lost a lot of that. And that's had an impact on 7 generations. And now through working through MFI and in the future, potentially FSC, there's a way to implement that 7-generation vision going forward. Next slide. So here are some other shared principles, benefits from the forest, and I'm keeping these sort of all together because they mold together, but benefits from the forests, environmental values and impacts, and high conservation planning within FSC. And from a Migma perspective, the protection and growth of traditional medicine, plants, sacred areas, sacred animals, the need to keep those places protected is something that is of great importance to the Migma people. In particular, species at risk, and of course there's species that are of special concern to Migma people. And in many cases, some of those traditional medicines, they're hidden away in places that are kept very sacred, and understandably that there's a need for protection of these areas. And also, we look at FSC and we see that it aligns very nicely with a wonderful approach to a strong stewardship-based way to approach forest conservation. So again, we see those broad linkages as well. So next slide. Oh my gosh, see, I'm already at the end. 10 slides goes very quickly. But anyways, that's a very short presentation that'll give you some idea. So thank you very much. And thank you, Elizabeth, for having me here and the rest of the team.
Great. Thank you, Veronica. That was a great presentation. It's nice to hear how the FSC principles are aligning with current work out in the East Coast. So next, we're going to hear from John Cathro, who's representing Gwet'in First Nation. And I will pass the floor over to you, John.
Thank you very much. Just let me check on how much time we have while I load up my presentation, just so we make sure we leave enough time for
I think we're on track.
Questions. Okay. Do you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Very good. Thank you, Elena and David, and with Wahkohtowin. Great job setting this whole program up, and I'm really happy to be part of this group and this presentation. My name is John Cathro. I'm a forester. I live in British Columbia, and this presentation is about the Gwet'in Forest Management standard development process and how that aligns with FSC Canada standards. And I'm going to get right into it.
Hey, John, sorry to interrupt for a moment.
Yeah.
I'm just going to mention you have it on the presenter view. That's what we're seeing, so you might want to switch it.
Okay, then. Thank you for that.
Throw that out there for you.
How's that?
No, it's still, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Anyway, sorry to interrupt, just figured.
No, that's good. It's funny, how many presentations can we give and still get it wrong? I don't want...
It's still showing that, but I don't know.
I'm gonna see if I can change it again. Does that change it?
No, I don't know. That's interesting that it's doing that for you. But anyways, that's probably better.
Let me try again. How many presentations can we give and still get it completely wrong? I wonder if I bring this down here on this screen and then try. Does that work?
I'm not seeing anything.
I'm sorry about this, folks.
No, and I apologize if I just made it more complicated, but I just thought it'd be an easy fix.
You'd think
So
it would be.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the beginning. Try and share our screen. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to unplug my other monitor and just limit the computer's ability to invade. Okay, we'll try this again.
There.
How does that look?
Yeah, if you go start slideshow or present mode. Yeah, there you go. You got it.
Awesome. That wasn't so hard, was it?
No.
Thanks.
Sorry about that, folks. Thank you, Leah. I'm the Tinto advisor. Tinto is Chilcotin for forest management, forest people in the forest. And the Tinto department is part of the Nemkai department, which is the lands department. And Leah, who just helped out so much, is part of Nemkai. I was brought in 2 or 3 years ago to help develop a forest management strategy for the Wahkohtowin caretaker area. And so this presentation is about implementing that forest management strategy. I'm going to give a little bit of background about the Wahkohtowin and their caretaker area, and then look at a comparison between two important planning documents, the forest management strategy and the management strategy for the Dasiko Tribal Park, and look at how these align with FSC standards. A quick bit of history. In 2014, of course, the Supreme Court of Canada established Aboriginal title for about 1,800 square kilometers of Silcotin traditional territory. That's centered around the community of Wahkohtowin. It's really important to keep in mind that within this declared title area, provincial forestry regulations do not apply. And that's why we're developing our own, what we're calling forestry rules. The Wahkohtowin are one of 6 Silcotin communities. And as part of our strategy, we're developing forest management rules to replace the regulations that no longer apply. And we're using Forest Stewardship Council standards as the starting place for that. So to put it in context, if anybody's been to British Columbia, the caretaker area, which is about 6,000 square kilometers, is in the Chilcotin Plateau. It's very mountainous, coast mountains to the east, and grassland, mixed forest as you move, or sorry, coast mountains to the west, and grasslands and mixed forest as you move to the west. The mighty Fraser River is along very close to the eastern boundary. To dig in a little bit, let's take a look at the caretaker area, and we'll start in the middle and move out. The dark colored area with the long tail going up the Chilco River is the declared title area, 1,800 square kilometers, no longer managed as part of the provincial land base. The dotted line you guys still see my screen? I won't try and point at it. The dotted line
We can't see
that goes.
We can't see it, John.
You can't see it.
Sorry.
I don't know what's wrong with this today.
You can see
try that
you
again.
and Tammy.
Okay, I'm going to stop the presentation and start again. I think it's because I tried to touch the screen. How's that?
Yep.
Awesome. The dotted line is what's known as the proven rights area. In the same court case, they did not declare this as title area, and it's essentially managed as a co-management area. And the dark green area is what is known as Dasiko Tribal Park, and we'll talk about that as well. The pink area is the caretaker area. The light green areas are existing protected areas. For those of you who are interested in intact cultural landscapes, the caretaker area contains a significant amount of intact cultural or intact forest landscapes. And I think that really speaks to the strength of the Chilcotin culture and their connection to the land. And I think we can all believe that anywhere that there are intact forest landscapes, in other words, forests that have not been logged and have roads built into them, are there because of strong Indigenous cultures. So let's take a look at the forest management strategy. We developed it 3 years ago. It was approved in September 2020 by Chief and Council, and since that time we've been working to implement it. The foundation of the forest management strategy is what's known as the Nemaya Declaration, which is one of the seminal parts of setting up the, which led to the Supreme Court of Canada decision. It established a very clear vision for how the forests in the caretaker area should be managed. As we were putting the forest management strategy together, Chief Jimmy Lulawa said to us, the strategy will be successful if the community sees itself as part of, it sees itself within the strategy. And so connecting the strategy to the people, to the land through engagement was a big part of getting the strategy approved. Let's take a look at what the strategy is all about. This is the vision. I won't read this to you, but this is what we aspire, the Gwet'in aspire for forest management within the caretaker area. And the way it's set up, along the right-hand side, there's the vision on the left, and then there's 4 main strategic priorities, the colored boxes there. These are supported by objectives for each one of those and an action plan to help us get there. And what I'm going to do now is compare those strategic priorities and those objectives to FSC principles and criteria, and in some cases, the indicators. There's a lot of words here, so I won't go through it, but on the left are those 4 strategic priorities. The strategy needs to be rooted in Gwet'in knowledge. It needs to lead directly to stewardship of the caretaker area that is rooted in cultural values. And I think there's a strong link, in addition to that, to what Veronica was saying about Eda Dumawa, two-eye seeing. All management must contribute to community benefits, and community governance needs to be built over time to build the capacity and the structures and the resources to manage the territory. The action items on the right-hand side are the steps that we will be taking, the main steps that we'll be taking to help us implement the management strategy. So now let's look at how those align with FSC principles and criteria. In all cases with the action items, there is a very clear link with existing principles and criteria. And remember, because provincial legislation no longer applies in the defined title area, it's important that we start with something other than a blank sheet of paper if we want to define our own forestry rules. And I'll show you a couple of direct examples of this. A big part of our work, as I mentioned, is to develop and implement a community engagement plan. This speaks directly to criteria 4.2, where communities have control over management activities within or related to the management unit. And for our work, the indicators that fall under criteria 4.2 go a long way to support the creation of rules that develop a carbon management system. Indicator 6.3.7 speaks directly to making sure that management activities do not negatively impact carbon values. And a big part of the FSC system is about ecosystem services broadly and carbon in particular. And then the third example, ensure community wildfire resistance. In Gwet'in territory, wildfire has been suppressed for 70 or 80 years, and cultural burning has been removed, and it's created the situation where we have such catastrophic wildfires, in particular in central British Columbia, as we've seen over the last 5 years in particular. Criteria 6.8 literally speaks to managing the land so that you have a mosaic of forest types that enhance environmental and economic resilience. And so a big focus of the management strategy is reapplying cultural burning to the land. And this is a great example of how that aligns with FSC standards. So let's change gears a little bit and take a look at Dasico. I'll show you the map again to remind you, but it's also a very large landscape, 3,400 square kilometers. It was created in 2014, and a management strategy was developed in 2019. It's led by 2 of the 6 Silkatine communities, Unisitine and Gwet'in. And the communities are in the process of working towards designation as an Indigenous protected area or some other form of governance that more closely aligns with community values. So the dark green area on here is Dasico, and you can see that part of it falls within the dotted line, which is the proven rights area where co-management is largely agreed to, and part of it is outside, meaning it is kind of business as usual, to look at it in simple terms, as far as the province and licensees having most of the decision making at this point. So again, the management strategy was put together in 2019, and the communities are working to implement this right now. So much like the Gwet'in forest management strategy, there's 7 goals and a number of objectives and action items that lead to the implementation of those goals. And as you read down, again, some very, very strong language to do with water, restoring ecosystems, limiting the negative impact of human activities, re-energizing Silkatine culture, identifying and protecting important cultural places, making sure that economic activity benefits the community, and again, building the capacity internally to effectively manage Dasico. So if we again look at a comparison of the goals and objectives to related principles and criteria across all 7 of those goals, you know, if we think of this in terms of a crosswalk, it's the language that was developed for the Dasico management plan aligns very well with the language in the FSC principles and criteria. And it's worth noting that neither the Gwet'in forest management strategy nor the Dasico management strategy used as a starting place the FSC standards. They were developed purely by engaging with the community and articulating how to manage the land consistent with community values. And it was only since engaging with Wahkohtowin that we started to do a direct comparison with the FSC standards, and as a result are seeing a very close alignment between the 2. I'll give you some examples. Obviously, protecting and stewarding watersheds all the way down to aquatic species, directly related to criteria 6.7, to avoid negative impacts on water quality, quantity, and to mitigate and remedy those when and where they occur. Restoring and protecting and recovering ecosystems is a really important one within the Dasico management plan. And of course, that fits very, very well with criteria 6.3, which speaks directly to not only mitigating, but repairing those negative impacts that have already occurred. Manage human land uses and activities is a really clear goal within the Dasyko management plan, and it needs to be done consistent with community values, and it needs to very clearly identify and protect cultural values, a direct relationship to criteria 3.7, where there's the expectation that you identify and protect through engagement the important places, the cultural values on the landscape. And then the last example, develop local management and stewardship capacity. So again, we need to build internally the capacity to manage the land based on community values as articulated through engagement in these various management planning documents. And that aligns directly with not only pretty well all of Principle 3, but in particular criteria 3.6 and Principle 10, which really speaks to management activities. And I've just got a couple of more, well, really one more slide. I realize that's a lot of words, and it's hard to take management plans, which are detailed and in both these cases quite comprehensive, and compare them to, in the case of Canada, the FSC Canada standard, which took, I think, probably 5 years to develop through engagement and all the rest of it. But in doing so internally, recognizing that part of our job is to develop forestry rules for a huge part of the caretaker area that where provincial legislation no longer applies, there is really, really strong overlap between the management strategies and the FSC principles. In particular, not surprisingly, Principles 3, Principle 6, and Principle 9. And for the Unama'ki perspective, in developing our forestry rules at the indicator level, there is really good language and good guidance on how we might be able to draft forestry rules, which would then form the basis of how we manage the forest to begin with within the tidal area and the proven rights area, and then moving out into Dasyko and out into the rest of the caretaker area. And what's interesting about as we move outside the tidal area, of course, is the FSC again provides really good guidance through FPIC agreements on how to structure agreements with both the province and with licensees for those areas that the province currently has management authority. All of the photos here are a photographer in Unama'ki, Keith Kepke. And he's not only a great photographer, but it's a very beautiful spot, and it's hard not to take beautiful photos up there. Apologies for the technical glitches, but I'm more than happy to join the other panelists and answer some questions.
Great, thank you, John. That was a great presentation. And once again, I just want to say Miigwech to all the presenters today. And as we move into our Q&A, I'm going to stop the recording.